Listen to a OAG update on the LTP audit process, which I presume, Nigel, you may have attended yesterday. I don't know whether, oh no, not Nigel. Nigel, you're there. Sorry, you're looking the wrong way. Nigel, I presume you may have attended yesterday as well. So that's probably for another day. But look, Ahmed, I'm going to hand over very quickly to you. Clearly, Ahmed's keen that we, and I am, that we pursue the development of our risk profile and arrangements. And in lots of ways, as was signalled, I think at the last meeting, Ahmed, this is the next step on the process. So I'm going to leave it in your hands to whip through with us, but I'll also crack the whip and make certain we're on time. So thanks, Ahmed, in your hands.
Good morning, everyone. This is risk management workshops. Before we start, you might think I'm from Egypt, so I have different English accent. So if you don't understand me or just raise your hand, I'm happy to repeat it again because I'm going to have a full discussion today about a very important topic. You have been handed over some exercise papers. So by then, please make sure that you hand it over to me again. So let's start. The agenda for today, we're going to cover defining of risks. What is risk? What's risk management and what's the process of risk management? Then we're going to talk about our current maturity level in the council. Then the big discussion will be around risk appetite statements and making sure that, making sure that the risk appetite statement is suitable or acceptable. We're not taking decision, we're just taking feedback about these statements. And finally, we're going to close with a small exercise about case studies. This is an example of a situation and how we can apply risk management principle in this situation. The outcome is, like I said, to have a feedback on the risk appetite statements. This is the main outcome, and make sure that it achieves the expectation of the council. So let's start. In general terms, what's risk? So if you want to define risk, risk is something that might affect me. So I can use my experience, my knowledge to manage or to assess this risk. So it's defined by the effect of uncertainty and objectives. There's three main words here. The first one is objectives. We need to define what's our objective so we can find our risks. So if I have an example, we say that a risk might be new legislation imposes additional financial and reporting requirements that are not met. So when you think about this statement as a risk, what will be the objective? The objective might think about legislative non-compliance or compliance for our legislation. But when you think about it, this statement, it is a cause, is not a risk, because any change or any legislation must have additional financial or administration reporting requirement. So my risk is not non-compliance with legislation because my objectives that I need to be in compliance with say. The second word is effect. Effect could be positive or negative. Normally, we'll be seeing the negative effect. Non-compliance, we're not doing this, we're not doing that. But we could have also positive impact, like, for example, cutting cost, meeting the budget, or saving in the budget. The third word, which is the most important one, is uncertainty. So uncertainty, if you are certain about something, this is not risk. Risk is about uncertainty of an event, whether it is the impact, what will be the impact or the consequence of this event, or whether it happened or not. So if I have an example, if I give you, ask you, I will give you $1 million to jump from a plane without a parachute. Definitely you're going to say no. Why? Because you're certain you're going to die. But if I told you that the plane is on the ground Now you're going to change your opinion and say, yeah, why not? So uncertainty is a very important aspect here. And this takes me to the definition. What's different between hazard, risk, and issue? By default, hazard is a dangerous event. If you have a shark in the ocean, a shark is dangerous, but in the ocean, so who cares? There's thousands to millions of them. It becomes a risk when it's going to affect me. So we have shark in our beaches now. Now this is risk. And now it is an issue if you are going swimming with the sharks. So now you have to take mitigation and get out of the water now. An issue can direct me to a risk, but in itself is not a risk. It is situations that we have to address it in urgent. To make it...
To put that into context right now, hazard is birds on our runway. The risk is the plane's going to crash, going to get suck a bird in, and now it's an issue of how do we get rid of those birds. Not yet.
So to make it easy for categorizing the risks, so we have come out with these 5 types or categories of risk. So the first level is the governance level. So this is affects the mayor and the councillors and elected members. So this is their risks. The second level is strategic risk. So this affects the management, strategic risks and strategic objective. Then we go one level below that will be the business risk. So this risk affecting each unit. Then the fourth layer will be the daily risks. And finally, we have project risk, which will be risk specific for specific project. So this is a good how this will be applied. So we have an example here. If we look at, we have from the previous LTP, 2131, we have community outcome, sustainable environment, which has have environment impact. So if we're going to think about what will be the governance risk here. So the governance risk might be that the elected members select the projects that might have negative environment impact on long term. What will be the strategic risk out of that? That the council activities result in environment damage. Okay, let's go one step down. The business risk is that specific activity may cause environment damage to a specific area or river. And finally, one level below that will be, for example, waste area aren't properly insulated and may leak waste to XYZ river. So now we are targeting a specific operation on daily basis. You might have a project risk and that also address the same environment impact. So this is how the risks are level and aligned with each other. There shouldn't be any operation risk that does not align with a business or a strategic risk, and the other way around. How we manage that? So the risk management is how we identify, manage, and control risk, and finally report this risk register to the management and the councillors. Risk management is a culture, not a process. So we must have a proper culture that supports this process. If we don't have a proper culture, it does not matter how much controls we have in place, because normally culture eats controls on breakfast. How we're going to do that? So the first part is to have the policy. So the risk management policy, this sets the tone how we're going to do, how we're going to manage our risks. We have objectives, so defines the objective for risk management, risk appetite, so what's risk appetite and what's risk appetite statement. We define what the risk culture look like, what's the culture we are trying to achieve. And finally, we have the monitoring and reporting. This is not a standalone policy. This policy will align with every other risks that deal with risks, like, for example, health and safety, projects, all of that. So all of them will have the same terms, the same process, and how we are managing risk. If we want to look at the process of risk management, so it starts with finding the objectives, what we're trying to achieve. Second, we move on to the risk assessment, identifying the risk, analyzing the risk, then evaluating the risk, define what will be the treatment for this risk, and finally, we record and report this risk with two supporting activities, which is the monitoring and review, and finally, communication and consultation. Okay, so the first exercise we're going to have today, in front of you, you have the current risk register, strategic risk. So using these dots, we'll have, let's say, 10 minutes. Using the dots you have, the one with the red with letter S, this will be for strategic risk, and the yellow one is for the governance risk. So have a look, and at the right-hand side, select the top three you think that this is represent a governance risk, or this represent a strategic risk. And most important, at the end, what else? What other risk we haven't captured yet? So we'll take 10 minutes.
Of the 5 risks, just so I could remind myself of that, please, Ahmed, because then I'll do my dots. There we are.
I know we're just having a discussion about the 7 and 12 infrastructure versus funding for infrastructure versus funding. And are they the same? You've got a view though, Bruce, that
Oh, no,
to
sorry,
keep them,
no.
keep them separate?
You've actually characterised it slightly different, so
Yeah,
I won't proffer my view at this stage.
No, that's all right. Yeah, whether they're different or whether they're the same,
Yeah.
in my view. So you've got sustainable platform and funding, but the sustainable platform's definition is similar to that of the funding. Levels and sources of funding differ from those forecast versus inadequate funding for horizontal and vertical infrastructure. It feels similar, but
The consequences are sort of the same.
yeah.
There's actually a small distinction, isn't there, between finance and funding, which is
Yes.
actually, do we have the
Different.
sources of finances open for us in terms of being able to deliver infrastructure? And then there's the question, can we actually fund those sources?
Yeah.
Yeah. In other words, we might have the finance source of debt, but can we actually fund the debt becomes a question. It's a big one for councils at the moment, although
Yeah.
gladly not here by the sounds of it, Nigel.
I'm sure they're all watching the live stream.
It will be also useful if we think about what other risk we don't have. Okay, another
Can
couple
I
of minutes.
ask a question, Ahmed? I'm interested in the categorisation, so no big drama, I'm ready for the exercise. Has this been run through ELT? This is sort of the framework that we are agreeing internally makes sense?
What's the question again?
Has ELT approved these categorisations of risk between governance, strategic, business, operational and project?
We have the policy, the draft policy was presented to the SLT yesterday. So
Yep. Okay.
this is for feedback and
Yeah.
to get everything in place, and then hopefully go to our meeting in March.
Brilliant. So what do you see? Sorry, so perhaps if you now that I've played with this, can you go to your next slide where you actually give the live example, or an example of actually how you make a distinction between, I'm interested in, quite frankly, the difference between governance and strategic, and what difference does that actually make in reality? Okay, because I haven't taken any off. I haven't taken any off my 12, and I'm just interested to know what the difference, why we see the difference.
So if you take these 12 risks, most of them are strategic risk. only one that I can see that is governance one, which is,
Oh, that's interesting. I've got the other way around.
I would have thought they were governance.
Oh, we're going to have a good debate, aren't we, Archie? Yeah. Sorry, no, I cut in, mate. You were talking well. So you see them all as strategic?
sorry?
You see all these risks except for one as strategic, is I think what
One
you said.
which is, I think, what's it? Councillors not following the principle of good governance. Out of this 12, this is the only governance risk. The rest are
So the
strategic.
distinction and the categorisation is between
If we
one
want to have
relates
another
solely to
example-
council activities, the other one relates to our mayoral and elected member objectives.
Yeah, so I might have a list of examples here. So, for example, we have elected member do not support local communities' expectation. This is a risk for the mayor and the councillors. Elected member decision-making not aligned with adopted plan and strategies. Another example will be unclear direction setting through the LTP or inadequate follow-through of said direction. External economic and social factors are not appropriately considered in planning and decision setting. So this is another example that I have in my mind that could fit as a governance risks.
Oh, Nigel, put your microphone on for the...
It's quite interesting because I had councils not following the principles of good governance as governance. Also, the failure to develop and maintain effective communications with the community, I thought was governance. Because I thought, to me, that doesn't, that's not strategic risk, it's actually...
Yep. It could fit governance and strategic also.
I think the thing that I probably wanted to lead to, and it's not necessarily because I'm disagreeing with this, is but so what's the difference? What's the value proposition in making this? Because, you know, I mean, I've obviously differently to you guys categorised this as governance and strategic, but actually from a risk governance perspective, I think we need to see all of these. You know what I'm trying to say is because the inherent nature in this is that actually primarily we're interested in governance risk, right? Whereas in reality,
Okay.
these 12, which, you know, in your categorisation is predominantly strategic, are still ones that I would be expecting must come on a quarterly review basis to the committee.
Yes, that's right.
So I think what I'm trying to reflect here is what's the value proposition behind trying to determine something as governance versus strategic?
Okay. So
I think,
when you
sorry,
think about
if I may, can I just add before you answer that, because you're more eloquent in risk than I am. I think what this is highlighting is that critical interface between governance and the organisation, you know, through the chief executive, and certainly the visibility of strategic risk does need to percolate up, absolutely, and governance does need to be informed and more informed as to how those are being treated and dealt with. But the scene is set in terms of understanding the governance risk and how governors are behaving and making decisions, good decisions, that flow through the organisation. So I think Ahmed made the point earlier that all these risks must be cascaded and aligned, and we're seeing that in that example. And I think that the vagueness at times is this governance, is this strategic, is really highlighting the fact that that linkage has to be there. Who has accountability for it is this strata, effectively.
Be rude and just jump in here. I like the examples you had. You know, you said you were thinking through what were some of the governance issues like, you know, inconsistent decision-making relative to our policies and strategies and all that sort of stuff. But they're just examples of what could happen under R8, governance roles and responsibilities. So, I mean, I don't disagree with that. In fact, you know, one of our biggest risks is actually ourselves.
Yeah, that's fine.
Which is what that's highlighting, that we make it.
When we have two governance and strategic, the main is to focus on who do. Sorry.
Yeah, come on up, Alan. You're welcome to the table, mate. We're just dealing with the big sheet here, okay, which are our current set of risks, which is a council or it's a committee where we're governing, and ArcMed's just is sponsoring a very interesting discussion about how we look at them. So in your hands, ArcMed.
So in having to the governance strategic risk, so it is for the focus and making sure that every type of risk is addressed properly. Both of them a governance risk must align with a strategic risk and vice versa. So we don't have a governance risk standing alone and there is no attached strategic or business risk. So you might have, like the example, all of them can be seen as one risk, which is environment damage. But who will do what? This is different. So in operations, we're talking about the site, making sure everything in a proper place. At the business level, that the manager want to make sure that his staff is doing everything properly. At the strategic level, we want to make sure that all of our activities does not affect the environment. The governance level, the selection of projects shouldn't have any environment impact. So all of them are one risk, but who is doing what is different. So having more than one level, or more than one layer, give visibility and accountability of who's doing what and who's responsible for what. And this takes us to the risk definition, which is the effect of uncertainty and objective. Each layer or each level has its objective he wants to achieve. Having governance and strategic as one, so it might get confusion, who's responsible for what. That's why it's separated. This is the first step, so it will not be optimal from day one. It is a journey, so we are talking about at least 6-12 months to have something that we say, okay, now we are in a solid place.
Being broadly comfortable, ArcMed, I'd probably go back to my value proposition question relative to what we would monitor on a quarterly basis. I do accept equally to make the distinction as important as to who has ownership of that risk. So I'm with you. We'll go with it. So it will be interesting to see what comes out as governance and strategic, unless there are other comments from. I think you were about to break into verse there. Are you?
Yeah, there is a subtlety to it, and I'm just not sure that my view at the moment is that the subtlety's too great for the maturity of where we're at on our risk journey. But like Bruce, happy to go with it.
I had, and I'm going to tell you my results. I had 3 that I thought were governance, and that was R8, R9, and R10. Because to me, that was all about building relationships, understanding those relationships, and also how council functions as a whole and how they're seen by the community. And to me, that's real governance risk if you've got a dysfunctional, if you had a dysfunctional council, then the community would be really pushing back. But if you've got a very professional, a very professional, balanced governors that actually professionally can challenge each other and actually work their way through any sort of risk or decision making, then that governance risk is reduced. And then it turns itself into strategic risk in terms of what they select as their particular direction.
But they're not.
I think there is a subtlety. But
There is a subtlety, but there also those 3, for instance, are also strategic risks because it's not just up to governors to engage. No. So I just wonder about the merits of separating them out, whether a dysfunctional council is actually a strategic risk on its own. Really coarsely not being so nuanced on it.
I suppose it turns itself into a strategic risk as you go down that hierarchy. Yeah.
If I was to look at something like legislative reform, why did you exclude that from being a governance risk? Because you see, the legislative reform as we have it at the
I
moment
only had 3 dots.
I've gone through the whole lot.
Bruce has used G's and S's right down his pages.
That's right. Well, that's why I said to you, I'd got my 6 out before I saw there was a whole bunch on the back page.
I think we also need to point out, Bruce, that Nigel Traynor did move his dots after they were locked in. Oh, anyway.
But all I'm wanting to reflect is that, I don't want to put this well, I will put it this way. Legislative reform is something of an existential threat to council. It is a point of what, it is, you know, affordable waters is in some sense begging the question, who are we, what are we in our community? You know, and yeah. So the critical. I mean, it seems to me that I mean, I can make an argument here. I think Ahmed reasonably in terms of the subtle distinction. Legislative reform is. I mean, it already has been for you, Nigel. I mean, you've taken taken a particular with the council's blessing a particular stand for quite a purposeful reason for what actually is Timaru District Council. So it strikes me that if I'm thinking about the governance risk, which is about what is relative to our objectives as mayor and council, something like legislative reform and how we respond, even in light of the new government, is still really a critical risk, because going back to uncertainty about what are our collective elected member community objectives. So it strikes me, you know, to me that's one of the biggest challenges that we have right at the moment. Even if, I mean, we already talked this morning, you know, informally, Three Waters reform, and do we encourage our colleagues to get into a CCO? Do we go to, you know, what does it mean? What does it look like? So I guess my argument would be, I think I could make an argument as an elected member, or in my case, an appointed member. I'd say 4 was also a governance risk, even on your basis, Nigel. That's really what I'm trying to sponsor here.
Anyway, Ahmed, what difference does it make whether they're governance or strategic? How is it going to impact what we do today?
So the question is, what happens from here in terms of the understanding of governance risk and strategic risk? From here.
That's a good question. Let's move on. So our current maturity is around 1 or 2. We need to go 3 and 4. So we have approved risk management improvement plan in 30 November last year. The improvement plan has 3 stages. Stage 1 is to get the policy. Stage 2 is to have the tools, set up the tools. We have a ProMap system to capture the risk register. Training for everyone on risk management and how to implement risk management. Stage 3 is to start doing this. So we plan to have a quarterly meeting with everyone to review the risk register. This 1, 2, to have a reporting to everyone. So reporting from the management to SLT and from the SLT to the Audit Risk Committee and the councillors. For the risks and reviewing the risk. So on quarterly basis, SLT reviews the strategic risk, which will be reported to Audit Risk Committee and the councillors. There will be another quarterly meeting with the councillors to review their governance risk as part of their reporting on the risk management. So it will be a continuous process of improvement, not just we have this risk and we are going to stick with it. This answer your question?
I'm not sure that fully answers the question. I think what's being asked is the distinction between governance and strategic. Do we actually need it? Are both of them of such a
that's fine.
high level?
This
Should they
is
be
open
merged?
for feedback. If you don't like the structure, we can combine both of them. If you are happy with structure, we can keep them.
I just want to understand how it's proposed to use the distinction. I guess it's coming back to the value proposition from here what's the benefit of separating them out? How are they going to be used, and what benefits it's going to provide to doing that?
That's fine. The benefit might be, number one, is for the SLT to focus on the strategic risks because this is under their control. Governance risk is under the control of the councillors. So this kind of separation between who do what. So if we say that one of the examples here is decision-making for unclear direction setting the LTPs. The LTP decision is within the councillors. So they have to find, let's say, what are the mitigations they're going to use to make sure that their decision in the LTP is well-informed decision. This is not strategic.
So is it a distinction between the what and the how?
Yes, that's it.
So I guess part of that too, Ahmed, is that we're not suggesting that the visibility of strategic risks isn't made to governors, that they'll still have that visibility and still have that debate and that assessment. We're not losing sight of that. They'll still have access to and expected to be involved in the reporting and understanding of strategic risks.
Of course, there will be a quarterly reporting on the strategic risks, the change in strategic risk, and annual report on all the business risk.
That wasn't necessarily my concern. My concern, from what you just said before, was that governance risk might be perceived by the council team as not being their responsibility. So if something's categorised as a governance risk, that's up to the councillors, and that's not the way it works because you guys do the doing and the councillors sort of provide some...
There's a good comment, and the answer to that is that the mitigations, responsibility of the mitigations. So you might have a mitigation set with the councillors, you might have different mitigation set with the let's say, for me, I report to the Audit Risk Committee, so you have to report to us on the risk management. This is one of the mitigation, and now it is not even with the GM, it was the manager. So it depends on what will be the mitigation.
I think what I'm hearing, and I'm probably now going more to your categorisation, Nigel, believe it or not. And that's not an attempt to seek approval from you, mate. What I'm hearing is actually, if we go to R8 and 9 and 10, although I would still include R4 in there, these are things which governors can most influence by their own actions. Most of the other stuff, we would have normal approaches primarily through advice from Nigel and your team as our prime advisors. A lot of R8, 9, 10, and dare I say it, 4, start with our own initiatives. So who actually influences most the outcome here would be those, my argument would probably be those 4, okay? Whereas the other ones tend to be ones that we have, there's nothing that wouldn't be traditional about management advice around how do we engage with, presumably doing that now with your LTP, how we will engage. But in the long run, how those risk treatments are actually carried out are strongly dependent on what happens from the individuals around the table. That's why probably, for the sake of moving on, I would go with you, Nigel, which is probably with my addition of R4, the 4 things that probably are most determined around this table as in contrast.
But they're not solely up to the councillors. I mean, at the ground level, community engagement, iwi engagement is significantly the work of council team.
Your fair point. In which case, it almost go back to R8, which I think might have been.
How the council consults with iwi, the culture through the organisation is actually set by the governors. If the governors do not believe in the treaty or anything like that, and it's possible, you could get a council that is of a certain ilk that will permutate down through the organisation, and I think that's the governance risk.
Yeah, it's also a strategic
Yeah.
risk though, because if you had that sort of situation, it would be, I would have thought, beholden on the executive and the organisation to try and mitigate that for the purpose of the council's own strategic direction and objective. I mean, it's, like I said, it's subtle and nuanced, but it's not clear cut, really.
That in itself, though, represents or suggests a council at odds with itself. You know, if governance is anti-teterity, for instance, and council officers are very pro and are actively developing relations there, which is anti the governance, it suggests a fragmentation of that government. So, which is the cultural chasm that Nigel was alluding to, I suspect. So, councillors set the strategy and the priorities and the direction, hand it over to Nigel and say, make this happen, you know, and Nigel makes it happen. If he's actually making things happen organisationally that you are opposed to, then we have issues.
Okay, so thank you for the feedback.
Could I just add before we move on that this is an iterative process and we are at a very early stage of maturity in terms of our risk management journey. So, you know, come with us on that journey.
Look, Ahmed, you know, and very diplomatic response, by the way, and I would be really keen, because I mean, clearly there's a wee bit of, as you say, we're trying to establish how we want to talk with each other. So I would be very keen that we experiment with this governance and strategic risk issue at our next risk committee to see how it works. And you know, that's fine, because Mark, even on your basis that we set the tone, which is fine, but that makes things like personnel or even health and safety a governance risk. Because if we aren't prepared to resource Nigel, that's going to affect those risks. So you know what I mean? So I do accept that there is a strong impact on how these risks reside, if that's the right word, in Timaru, depending on how governors operate. But then I'm just making an argument they're all governance and they're all strategic, which gets me back to my original question, what's the value proposition? But to move it, I mean, firstly what you've done, you've given us a good basis to discuss our risks, by the way, Ahmed here this morning, because we haven't answered the question, are there any others, and we probably should look at that. But I think equally, as we get into our first risk committee meeting, I can't remember when that is, somebody will tell me in my diary, we'll get it up to date, Bruce, pretty soon. Let's see if we can explore and use the distinction and see if it's working for us. That's the best thing. Nigel.
And please don't be offended what I'm saying, because it's now not well thought through. What I think is part of the governance risk is really understanding the impact the elected members have on management and the organisation. And I think we underestimate that at times, because council is very different, in my view, to a board of directors. The councillors are elected, the councillors are there to actually set the community direction of what they've been elected on, but also in legislation, they've got very open access to the staff. And so therefore the governors have actually got to ensure that they're treading that line very, very well. And just a simple unprofessional sort of behaviour can really do damage. And even their own beliefs, of the council beliefs, even their own beliefs rattle right through the organisation. So please don't underestimate that. And I think that that's part of where we're coming from with what are our governance risks and how do we actually make sure that we're open enough to have those conversations about, you know, particular risks we have with that, and especially sometimes behaviour. Yeah, so sorry, that's my unwell thought through observation as a newbie coming in.
you haven't offended me. I don't know about Nigel, well, he'll tell you later on, but you're right. I mean, that's true across it. But then I think if I can just relate, what you have just said goes back to where I think we're trying to articulate this actually, R8 becomes really important because that's actually most determined by us, but actually it does influence then how we respond to the other things and the treatments of all the other risks that are here, which we're, strategic, big, whatever we want to call it, are logical areas that as governors we would look at. And so
if you have a situation where staff are too scared to come into the chamber to present something, that's a major risk, and that can easily happen. And that's something that, to me is part of the governance risk, and it falls under one of those 8 or 9 or whatever it is. Yeah.
just suggest, do we have any, can we ask folk whether they had any others that weren't here? Can we ask whether there were any other strategic risks that weren't here?
Justin's got
Oh, Justin's got one. Okay, all right. Oh, brilliant, mate. Let me guess.
And you'll guess
Right,
right,
man.
cyber. So I think cyber is a strategic risk we haven't had on the list there. It's good enough for ARC. I think it's probably one we should add into the list there. So that's my 2 cents.
What's encompassed in cyber in your world?
Anything digital into the council. So this is the entire access point into council of whether it's your website, picking up a phone and calling council is cyber, because that's
AI?
a contact point. It's all the data that we hold. It's AI. It's the privacy of data, because it when it goes wrong, but I don't want to talk about the consequence, but it's enough that you can collapse an entire council or a business or an organisation through that one channel. So I think it should be, at least at a strategic level, thought about.
So we did have a situation, I think it was Hamilton. Hamilton Hospital got collapsed because of cyber security was breached into their PMS, patient management system. That could easily happen in a council.
Well, look, I would be comfortable, Nigel, with Justin's suggestion that we include this, because in reality, Justin's more or less reported to us quarterly on cyber risk anyway. Yeah. So in effect, I think it's good to acknowledge that the committee does need to keep itself appraised of the risk. Indeed, even in the way that you've just talked about it, Justin, with things like AI, with data management or strategy and what have you, there's many prongs to that. So it warrants a continuation, I would argue, at the committee of what we have been doing. But actually, I think Archmed, I totally agree. We might as well just acknowledge reality. It should be on our list.
So what would you take off or amalgamate?
Oh, that's an interesting question. That was going to be it wasn't quite put that way. I was going to say, would any come off? But that might be, you might have put it a bit more tighter. Actually, if we're going to keep, 12? Yeah, we should keep to no more than 12. What one comes off? What is the least? Yeah. The least doesn't mean it's not a risk, but what is the least risky?
I think 12. Yeah, I think it would be an easy merge in my own opinion. But
7 and 12, did you say?
Yes,
Yeah, I
12
agree.
sits in 7 effectively. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next topic, which is risk appetite. So the risk appetite reflects the council culture and philosophy and its approach taking risk. If we want to put it in some, let's say, how we can express that, we can say, for example, we put a speed limit of 100 kilometers per hour. So this is our appetite. So any risk is any event that may result in going above the speed. Organization might have a high or risk appetite. We use this risk appetite to define our risk matrix. So if you have a high risk appetite, that means you are going to accept more risks to be, that's why it's in the green side. If you are in low risk appetite, that means that you don't accept more risks. So the low risk decreases. Risk appetite have 8 categories. So we are proposing this 8: financial, health and safety and well-being, information management, operation, legal, reputation, environment, and finally, impact on staff. We define as appetite, either we don't have appetite, so no risk appetite, or we have low appetite, medium, or high appetite. Based on this definition, we're going to, or we already have proposed the risk consequence and likelihood definitions. So this will be the, in front of you, you have the proposed risk appetite statement in your pack. So we'll have another 10 minutes, go through this risk appetite statement and give me your feedback if you have, is anything, let's say, affecting the council? Is the risk appetite reflect your expectation? Is it correctly reflect what the council want to achieve? So let's say 10 minutes.
Brilliant. I mean, sorry, you got it in front of me, and I'm showing that I'm a bit slow this morning. Must be the start of the year for me. We have agreed that we'll merge R7 and R12, right? Risk 7 and 12, which is the funding and the sustainable platform, correct?
For adding
Sorry,
your-
just I think you might, I just wanted to make certain that we haven't lost a point. We were sponsored by Janice. The idea was, you know, good governance, we don't just have an ever-expanding risk profile. We actually keep ourselves close to the it used to always be the top 10, but we're running with the top 12 here.
So
We've agreed to add on cyber.
reviewing the...
Logically, we should drop something if it's warranted. And I think we've got the suggestion here that the sustainable platform risk R12 and funding R7 are so similar, even though there are some different words, we should actually merge those because they come to the same thing.
I just want to highlight that this risk will have another review to make sure that we are capturing the correct risk and appropriate risk. So this is the current risk we have. This workshop is not discussing this specific risk and challenge or make sure that it's correct or not correct. It's just for having feedback from you. This is the top priorities for me. This is a new risk idea not captured. Then I will take it back, formalize risk statement, because currently this risk statement need another amendments to make readable, because any risk must have an event, specific event, explicitly easy to understand what are the causes and what are the consequences.
So
This will be another
work on 7 and 12 and see if
work-
they can be merged, and we'll look at the cyber one. That's what you're
Yes,
saying.
so there will be a
Work out
workshop
the
with SLT to go through this risk, and this next stage it will be reported to the ARC. This is our strategic risk after taking considerations and new approach we are using.
Oh, well, brilliant. I don't want to force it, make it look like we're making a decision in a workshop. Number one, I should say that very quickly for the benefit of anybody that's watching. But okay, just take that as a lead from us. We're struggling with the distinction between R7 and R12 from an effective governance perspective. And so as you go back, and I had to take your point, sorry, I was probably taking for granted what you have just outlined as your process would occur, that actually with the feedback that we've had from this workshop, you know, including we agree cyber should be in there, that actually you'll work back through both your risk processes but also with SLT, so that ARC we can affirm or otherwise, you know, what's come out of what has been the feedback out of here. So I'll leave it on that sort of advisory basis. Please consider merging that with a sense that I'd be expecting that it would actually occur unless there's some really compelling reason that they are different risks. Okay, brilliant. We're into risk appetite.
Okay,
We need to do the exercise. Do we like it or not? Is that right?
So I have,
Sorry, not do we like doing risk appetite, but actually are these statements what we would expect? And Nigel, this is one where I'd be very interested if we had management's views as well. My experience elsewhere, so you guys over there, I'd be very interested to know what your appetite is. Andrew, around infrastructure. You might want to guess what mine is as well, because actually you talked before, Nigel, about governance management interface. This actually is a critical messaging process. What are we prepared, you know, it's what Ahmed quite well has said to us about risk and opportunity. Where are we prepared to be at with this? So I'll be very interested to hear. I'm not putting all acid only solely on you, Andrew, but I'll be really interested in management's view around this as well as my colleagues here from a governance side.
I kind of ironically see here there's a risk and defining a risk appetite, so some of these, so that carries risk if you're going to define what your appetite is for some of them, just saying.
Which one are we going to
Okay,
start on,
what?
Ahmed? Which is the easy, which do you reckon we'll be most in common on? Health and safety? Who wants to lead off on health and safety?
Oh, I will.
You will, Mark? Okay, go for it, mate.
Health and safety that's a minefield in itself, and I guess we need to understand that the relationship that this council has is not just with its staff, but with those who are contracted to it. So as a PCBU, we have a liability, or council has a liability to ensure that its contractors and subcontractors are considered the same as staff. And if we look at a major function that I've dealt with over the years, a number of councils in the area of, say, waste management, refuse collection, council may establish a no or a very low risk appetite for health and safety, and then it will let a contract, or may let a contract, this one's an exception, may let a contract for curbside collection that involves manual collection of bags or bins, picking the bins up. Curbside collection is regarded by WorkSafe as one of the most dangerous activities in the country, next to forestry and mining, and manages to kill someone at least once every 3 years, and that's from major waste companies. So when we let contracts, we need to be very mindful that we may go for the least cost contract, and if that involves manual collection, we're basically signing up to accept that someone who we have contracted will be killed or may be killed in the course of the next 3 years, or certainly 3 times within the course of a contract span, versus a fully mechanised system where the driver doesn't leave the truck and is therefore not as subject to injury as a manual collection. So that's the fine line and the boundary, isn't it, which says health and safety, yes, we'll have no appetite, but it has to translate through all of our other processes and contracts to ensure that we're actually putting our money where our mouth is. And more often than not, it's an expense of putting your money where your mouth is. That's my soapbox from the morning.
So what's your appetite?
My appetite for health and safety is that we've got no appetite for practices that lead to endangering both our staff and our contractors. And if that means that we look at a more expensive mechanism to execute some of those services, then that's what we should be factoring. Certainly something will have to give in other areas, but from my point of view, that's an absolute non-negotiable.
Yeah. Scotty, welcome.
I do agree with what you're saying, but I actually think there should be more than one statement here, because absolutely we have zero appetite for people harming themselves at work, but we do also need to be mindful that in some cases there are unavoidable risks, and we don't want to put ourselves in a position where, for example, a function actually can't be carried out because we have zero appetite for any risk. I mean, we're not asking cleaners to wear hazmat clothing, for example, or there could be contractors that use tools that by their very nature are dangerous. So I think there needs to be a second statement so that some functions don't become prohibitive or even cost prohibitive in some cases as well.
Oh, no, absolutely. I'm talking about where we do have those options, and those options are viable options. So, but I take your point, absolutely.
Which is why I think there should be an additional statement. I'm not sure how you would word it.
Well, I think it's a bit like the consequence tables, where often when you're describing consequences that have 2 or 3 factors to it, rather than just one bald statement. Because actually, I can't live with "we have no appetite for risk," because if it's as bald as that, and we are subject to review by WorkSafe, we will fail. I mean, you've used your example. My example is, last year in Tauranga, we lost a small child because they drowned in a fountain. If you have no appetite for risk, we get rid of all fountains out of Caroline Bay. Do you have one there? I think you do. You get rid of it. What about our roads? My way to ensure there is I have no appetite for risk on our roads is you get cars off. So, you know what I mean? I know that's going to absurdity in one sense, but I think it's actually, in this situation, quite critical we are careful in our statements and to say I agree with what's the requirement under the Act? we eliminate risk or what is reasonably practicable. That does mean we're going to be living with a level of risk. So I think it's, this is one of those ones where, going back to your arrows, yes, we want to go that way, but actually the reality of life is that there is a limit to how far you can go that way. So I'm actually with you. I'd like to see some statements which reflect, and actually you, Mark, as well, that reflect that drive. But the reality, we have to accept that as a council, we have activities that will, regrettably, over time, cause harm. But we need to do something that actually minimises that. But it can't be no. My view, it would be one. I've got the man here that runs the pools, so you're going to tell me very quickly what you reckon, buddy. And that's why I'm interested. That's why I'm saying it's very interesting to get the debate going.
No, I just think it's rare that we would have absolutes and feel safe with that, because that's not a safe place to be. So I think you have statements of intent that you're striving towards. I don't like these, we have no appetite. I don't think that's practical here.
There are some here that are, we have no appetite for the deliberate misuse of our information. I mean, that's an absolute that's acceptable, I think, for instance. But health and safety, that statement's...
There's a few down here that you would want to be boxed into a corner. Very, very careful with some of the words.
Yeah, I like number 8, we have no risk, we have no appetite for the risks that result in the significant or irreparable damage to the environment. We're running a landfill. Well, you would close the landfill up.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. I'll shut up. That's good. I get that.
Well, that's if we had no risk, the landfill at Rangitata would be gone by now. But
Sorry?
the landfill at Rangitata would be gone by now if we had zero risk. So, and it's still there. The problem that I have is that these statements sit here, and then actually the organisation's operating here.
Yeah.
And the problem is, this is a journey. But if we still have the same statements in 5 years' time and the organisation is still operating here, well then actually what's Audit going to say? What's the public, whoever assesses us across a wide range of functions? We haven't moved anywhere, so we've got to be really careful, I think, with these statements. And so maybe we do raise them a little bit, because in all reality we are accepting levels of risk in everything we do. So. Let's perhaps be a little bit closer to real, not to say that we don't need to focus on the improvement part.
Low is a better word than no. And I also worry that some of our stuff is like if you look at the financial one, low appetite for risk and negativity negatively impact the council core financial business. You got to wonder whether that's moderate, because if it's low, then we would be upping the levels of our depreciation. We would be increasing our rate revenue and so forth, but we're actually running a moderate appetite for risk that negatively impact just through that very nature of how we set our annual budgets. And also it goes into the one around our infrastructure. We have a low risk of, it's the one the council has a low appetite for disruptions for its operations and processes. Well, we know our water infrastructure is not in pristine order. So if we were running a low appetite, then that water infrastructure would be our number one that we'd invest in, and we'd invest in higher earlier. So we need to think that through as well. And I just wonder whether that's moderate as well. Just because everything sort of connects.
I'd even say
And like you, I was struggling in my head is the difference between appetite and reality. So this might be your appetite, but reality is quite different.
Yeah, you might not meet your appetite for some time.
Yeah.
And the
And
challenge
where does that sit in our thinking, our conversation?
And the challenge is it's fine to have SLT in governance conversations, but actually in practice it's level 3 and below that, you know, that's where the rubber hits the road. So that's the challenge. So the likes of infrastructure as an example, we accept a low level of risk. The point you just made around delivery of asset planning, I would disagree and say that organisations, you know, probably more than moderate, it might be almost medium at the moment. And why I say that is if you know, coming into the LTP, our AMPs should be a living document, but they're not. It's a rush to get them back up to speed every 3 years. Well, that shouldn't happen. So, you know, that's the basis of our asset planning. But I don't believe we're doing it. So I'd say we're far from low in practice. So is low, you know, a target that we want to get to? You know, I think we're probably operating quite a level above that at the moment, which is not necessarily ideal.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance between risk and I guess, affordability, and that's it. So we do take higher levels of risk to make our more affordable. And you're right about the asset management plan one. You know, there are some of the lower of the assets, like in the parks and those sorts of areas, which we haven't even got proper asset inventories yet, but they're considered low risk in that respect that we don't need. Whereas in the waters and the roading, we have very, very robust databases and a lot of modelling around that. So, but yeah, we operate under a lot of risk all the time, councils in particular. You know, we have public areas, we're faced with coastal erosion, and I'll make the point about environmental harm is stormwater. You know, we are discharging contaminated stormwater into the environment every time it rains. So, but we accept that risk.
So I guess that brings around the definition of appetite. And is it what your appetite is, and that's different to what you're forced to actually eat? Because everyone will face that. And Ahmed, I guess we're looking to you for guidance as to how to position that.
So is this about agreeing an aspiration, which is an appetite, and then the reality, and then mapping that and monitoring that differential? You know, so we want low for health and safety. We're actually delivering moderate because of the, you know, response to the actions that we're doing. We actually understand that gap. There are things we can do to bring it closer to aspiration.
Yeah,
but
so organisations do have reports too of those risks that exceed the council's appetite. Looks like we'd have a pretty full report.
The answer is yes to that, Mark. And I'm not going to struggle here if we want to have a low appetite for health and safety, but no, we're operating at moderate or high. You know, I mean, that just says we have to do something. That's the problem. I mean, the problem with that is that we have to do something, but then I don't want to live with high. I mean, it's not fair for a whole bunch of reasons. So that's an important conversation. Look, I chair one of a couple, but one of them I'm thinking of, one of mine on the east coast of the North Island. So the cyclone has meant all our appetites for our strategic risks have been exceeded. Now, we've had to live with that for about a year now, in the sense of we just can't do everything to bring it back, but we know we want to bring it back. So the question is, what's the plan to get from the high to where we want to be? I think Ahmed, one of the things that I'm used to in this exercise, which may be helpful, is when I was doing mine, I looked at the consequence ratings, because consequence and appetite are often very similar. I suspect if I was a purist in risk management, there would be people that saying, well, actually your consequence tables are quite different. But actually, I think and I look down the moderate column here and say, does that feel like who we want to be at Timaru? And you know, there is a question, does that moderate column, for instance, capture all the dimensions that we're talking about? I mean, you've mentioned a couple of things here. I think, Janice, in terms of actually how would we describe in our Timaru terms, what do these consequences look like? But probably, and it's a bit of recalibration, my experience says, most councils are moderate. We're prepared to take a bit of opportunity. You see, for instance, like believe it or not, for reputation and stakeholder, and I don't know how you would feel about this, Nigel, as a mayor, I'd actually have quite a high risk appetite. Why? Because the opportunity of being open to the community or be open with iwi is worth the risk. You know, so you need to in some sense work out, do the descriptions, particularly under the consequence tables, tend to fit with your sense, this is where we want to be in Timaru. So if I looked at, in fact, I started looking at this when I got back to Justin's cyber. Where are we? It's here somewhere, isn't it? You know, just as an example, it might be a sort of a more concrete one. So the moderate description says, and you're welcome to jump in on this one, Justin, multiple internal security breaches affecting a single IT application, prolonged, more than 1 day loss of data, technical performance issues impacting care service failure across more than one limit. Now, whether that represents moderate, we might have a debate, but that doesn't feel like where I want to be, right? I think it's where you want to be, Justin. If I was, though, to read down minor, I would start to say, oh, that looks like I could handle that. Now, again, you might want to say to me, oh, Reece, you've got to be nuts. But, you know, that says, okay, we'll have the odd hiccup. We could be out for a day, but we're back up and running fast. And to me, that seems real. So, you know, I would say that we're in the minor category there. What I'd actually say is that actually, I think we're a moderate council, if I can say that. I actually think the description you have for minor would be what I would put in the moderate column, and I would move it out one. Because I don't, you know, it's just my personal view. If we're going low, moderate, high sort of type idea for risk, I think moderate is actually, we can't spend the money, sorry, this is not me trying to drive budgets now, Nigel or Justin, to do what would be insignificant. We have to be prepared for some disruption. I could handle that if I knew it could be limited to, say, a day. You know, you would say, well, but what about, Bruce, but what about? That strikes me as being in a moderate position. So these descriptions, I guess my long point, these descriptions are helpful to me in thinking about where we as a council may or may not want to sit. Where would you sit on that scale, Justin?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think maybe looking at the minor, if you put the minor, the consequence into the moderate, then I could live with moderate. As soon as you're talking about multiple breaches, I'm starting to sweat, because then that to me sounds more severe than what I would class as a moderate. So I could live with moving that one to the right. I mean, I'm all for the smallest amount of risk we can possibly have.
That's right.
So.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think, but this is where we have to go. It goes back to, I think, Mark's sponsored discussion about aspiration versus reality. And somewhere you do have to mash the two. I mean, in the long run, we don't want anybody killed at work or injured. But as I said, if that really is what I'm aiming for, I'm going to strip half the playgrounds. There will be no playgrounds. And I won't mow the grass because I might run over a kid when I'm mowing the grass, because that's happened in Hastings.
But you will mow the grass because the birds will be in planes.
That's right, exactly. So, you know what I mean? So you know, there is a level of reality here, and in some sense I'm talking about investment. So, you know, I mean, I don't know what the consequence, by the way, of adopting, shall we say, what is my new definition of moderate IT, but now I can have a discussion with you, Justin.
Yep. Yeah.
What is it, you know,
moderate as that stands there.
Are we moderate now? What would be the investment required?
No, I would say we're minor now. I don't think I couldn't accept a moderate level of risk in
Yeah,
IT
yeah,
like
yeah.
that. I couldn't live with that.
Well, I don't think I could either. It
No,
sounds risky. It sounds too risky
Make me
for my purposes. But I mean, you know, and I mean, okay, it's a bit semantics to be playing
Yes.
around. Is this moderate or minor? We can keep it this way. I do find it's good if we can say to staff, and I'm thinking, Ahmed, about your maturity program going down the track, which I think is really good, is that actually, you know, we can't afford to be a risky organisation chasing our objectives on the whole. But we do have to be prepared to attain a level of either grabbing the opportunity, which means a bit of heightened risk, or indeed there are some things which, you know, broadly are non-negotiable within reason. And it tends to come out, in my view, getting around the sector in the area of moderate.
See, I read this on, if you stick with IT, and they're different for the different risk factors. The IT, if you look at insignificant, isolated internal breach of IT security, we should have a tick. They should be isolated, not repeat. Affecting, then, because minor says repeat internal security breaches, well, we shouldn't have repeat. We should get an isolated one, learn from that and fix it.
Yeah.
Affecting a single IT application or system. Next one is no loss of data and or key information, isolated IT equipment failure. That, to me, the strange thing about that is, to me, this is insignificant. To me, that's minor. I think insignificant is even better than that.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think you could shift, actually looking at that, you could almost shift the entire lot or one to the right. I don't know if there's one that's worse than severe, or maybe you combine the major and severe.
Or mix them up.
Mix them up a
You
bit,
might
but yeah,
have
no, I
those,
reckon you could.
those two and insignificant to me are doable. Temporary up to 1 day loss of data or key information. Now, you might get that in IT, you might get that in an IT system, maybe not. Technical performance issues impacting key services, well, really? And a failure across 1 year. So there's sort of, those two are actually interchangeable, I think.
We look forward to seeing what you come back with.
Yeah.
Because I think that's
Whereas-
actually, I think Ahmed, I mean, I've been a bit naughty, I'm overtaking things here, but I mean, I think that's where we're heading towards. Because I mean, if I was to flick you back then to health and safety, Nigel, given, without being too pointed, you have the liability, where do you sit? Now, you see moderate to me is a wee bit, that looks a bit more like a high. But if we had to accept there was a need for first aid treatment only, but then equally reversible health effects, so, you know, a kid grazes their knee on a swing, I'm about to say, so what? But I mean, the point is, if that's what we can limit it to, that's great. That's better than not having a swing in the first place. Perhaps the level of EAP support. Is that the sort of health and safety environment we can live with? So, Nigel, I mean, I think you're chasing to the end here.
Just changing the title, like environment, right? So I believe we've got two significant risks.
Yeah.
And I've got no evidence of this, but they're in my head. And that is the location of our wastewater, our ponds, and the location of our landfill. To me, they're high-level strategic risks that may be impacted by climate change. So we're actually taking a moderate risk on that.
Yeah.
But the day-to-day operation of those, our appetite is quite low in terms of making sure that on a day-to-day basis, they're running safely and soundly. But there's a moderate risk we're taking that, you know, the sea might take them away or encroach on them. I'm only making this up, but you know what I mean? So there's actually different levels for the different levels of appetite for the different levels of time on those. So strategically long-term, we've got a moderate appetite on those particular assets. Otherwise, you move them now.
That's right. And we are
But
dealing,
on the day-to-day, we've got a low appetite.
so we are dealing.
Makes
you know,
sense.
and I think that's where Ahmed's distinction between the various grades of risk is also helpful as well. That actually within the waste activity, I mean, we're averaging here, aren't we? I mean, let's face it, that's what we're doing. I think actually the critical thing, and Ahmed has just gone, and Janice, I think you're trying to get it to us. I'd like to suggest that SLT consider, Mark, if we were to settle on being moderate, so we're a cautious but open to opportunity council, down those dimensions of risk, what would be the right descriptor if we were moderate? So, we've had that discussion around health and safety, we've had that discussion around IT, and the columns to the left and right, can be merged. But I think from an accessibility, from a perspective of us as governors, that would give us a sense of saying yes or no.
Yeah, just a comment. You can focus on the consequences, but there is also, I think, you do need to consider the likelihood as well. And, I take an example there is earthquake-prone buildings. We have a lot of earthquake-prone buildings, potentially, and public are in them. Now, if we get an earthquake, it will cause chaos, but the likelihood of the earthquake is very low. So we are prepared to accept the risk in keeping these buildings open. Yeah.
Look, and you raise a very good point. I said it's almost the same as the consequence. I was cautious and said it's almost the same as the consequence tables. I'd really like to think, perhaps, Andrew, as SLT thinks through what could be some of the descriptors of what does a moderate council look like. You think also about the likelihood. I get that. That makes a ton of sense, particularly in the example you give us, and it may well be that is the case.
What I'm hearing from you, Bruce, is we're wanting the same words, the same descriptors rattling through everything. So our risk appetite is insignificant, minor, moderate, major, or severe, in line with this, rather than low, medium, or so. So you actually everything's in the same terminology. Yeah, and I think that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, look, it would be ideal. It depends how you want to do it. If our risk appetite is low, moderate, and high, and that's the most helpful way for us to think. I think what I'm trying to do is, you can tell me we're moderate risk, Bruce. They're going to say, so what does that mean? And the descriptors are, as Ahmed has helpfully done with right from the start, the descriptors are really important to understand what that is. So whether we use low, moderate or high, or minor, insignificant or whatever, doesn't matter in some sense. Although it's good for integration, it's the description underneath that really helps. Okay. And I think we've done a lot that actually gets us towards that, but it just needs a bit of backroom thinking now to move the principle of what we're talking about forward. Does that make sense? Ahmed, I've overtaken, sorry, but because I was very interested to understand how we would do that. Does that make sense to you, Ahmed?
Yeah. So the current statements you have here is already aligned with this risk appetite statement. It might not have a clear linkage saying that this is doing that, but they are both working aligned with each other.
I think part of the takeout is that we will need to tighten up those alignments. But I think also to your point, Bruce, it's about TDCing-izing this, isn't it? To make this customised so that governors right through to staff can actually see the applicability of it to everyday activities and actions. Yeah. Okay.
Those descriptors ultimately are ones that we have to internalise, Mark, because indeed we are TDC. I mean, they've got to be as comfortable to Nigel as they are to this Nigel.
Absolutely.
And to the person that runs the landfill.
Yeah. Okay.
Because otherwise we aren't going to get that integrated nature. So it does have to be Timaruised. There's a new verb, is it? Is it a verb? I don't know what it is. Timaruised anyway, but it makes sense.
Bruce, I get doing that for the descriptors around likelihood and consequence, which I imagine is part of what you're going to do internally before you bring it back to ALT. But the risk, and so that's looking at the consequence on the organisation, whether it's an insignificant, a minor, etc., not making But the risk appetite is different to the consequence, because it might be, say, a moderate impact on council might not be within appetite. So there are, I'm just clarifying, there are still two different things here.
Yeah, look, I think there's also the point that in part Andrew was making before about the earthquake-prone buildings, and I agree. I do it with caution that I mix consequence with risk appetite, but equally there is. I think it's for ease of moving things forward that you do consider it best through the consequence, because it's actually a description of what we could be prepared to tolerate if we're trying to achieve our objectives.
I think it's
probably doesn't satisfy you, but I think that's why I just pushed down the line I have.
Yeah, I think it's probably more important to get the likelihood and the consequences correctly defined and stated, and the risk appetite can come later, because at least then you're looking at and reporting on the impact on the organisation on your risk tables. Risk appetite's quite hard. Not many organisations necessarily do it well.
It's taking the levels, so we start with the risk appetite. We start with the risk appetite. So this is, let's say, the example we have here of information management. So we recognize and accept moderate level of risk associated with application. So this is appetite. We take this appetite and okay, so if we have a consequence, what will be the statement? So we can assess risk based on this statement to achieve or not to go beyond the appetite acceptable by the council. Which we say that this is X.
Gets down to the definition of appetite, because appetite's a bit nebulous, isn't it? It's like it's a desire to be, there's a desire to have something rather than actually having it. And I think that's what we've got to keep in context.
Or is it what you can stomach rather than desire?
Well, the appetite is a desire to eat, a desire to actually have something. It could be what your stomach as well. The same thing here.
I'd put it this way. I think you raise a really good question, Janice. To me, it's actually about how we risk aware, as in contrast to risk averse. So if I go back to, say, my stakeholder risk here, where I said I think I would personally sit with preparedness for a high risk. I would look to take some opportunity. I'm prepared to look for that opportunity because I think the gains are worth it. But it also means that if it fails, I have to be prepared to live with the consequences rather than anything else. Now, I might have to reassess. I would have to reassess, was I correct to adopt such a strategy? But I have to be prepared to also say I was prepared to take the risk and live with it, live with the consequences. That's what we're trying to do here with the sense around appetite, as in contrast to likelihood and consequence. That's just describing what could happen. I'm keen on actually using the risk appetite to actually to drive into the organisation in the way that you want to. Ahmed, I think actually a sense of here goes the council, the corporate view about how much how serious are we going after these objectives, what can we tolerate? But actually it also means that if risk occurs and it's within what our risk appetite is.
You see, the other word for appetite is hunger.
That's right.
Okay, you hunger for it.
Yeah.
So we've got a hunger to be low, to be low in this particular area. Doesn't mean you are low. It means you're hungry to be low. And that's quite a different concept to actually saying, we can't be low. Actually, you may never get there, but your hunger is to be there, which drives your actions. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Does that make sense?
It's the same decisions we make in terms of, choosing your KiwiSaver fund, isn't it? You can be in a growth fund or a balance fund or a low risk fund, and depending on where you're at in your employment cycle, you know, the closer to retirement, you may choose a very low risky fund, you know, whereas if you're 25, high growth, because if returns drop to negative for 10 years, it may not matter. You know, you expect to pick it up. So I guess that's the thing. It's not saying we're not going to go with the risky things in some cases. We just need to understand what they are.
Yeah, which goes back to good descriptions around Janice's point about likelihood and consequence.
It is. I agree with the consequences side. Maybe you look at it from over a particular time period, say in the next 10 years, how many consequences you're prepared to accept, how many major disruptions, how many failures, and look at it that way over a time period. I don't know, just a suggestion, but it is a way of determining your appetite. It really comes down to the front page test too, you know.
Yeah, well, and that's a really good point, Andrew, because as you mature, you actually start to attach indicators to each of these, which is things like what is the level of disruption we're prepared to put up with. So you take the employee risk, which is real. Some of the committees I'm on, we have actually set a turnover level that we are prepared to tolerate. Okay, on the basis that turnover's good, too much turnover is bad. What are we prepared to tolerate? But it leads, that actually, which is important, and you know, whether we settle on one might be moot. But actually, it comes back to this concept of good governance, decision-making and investment, which is actually if we have a sustained level of turnover that's greater than our appetite, there are some consequences which flow from that in terms of where we invest. So, you know what I mean? So it's just trying to play with and drive those sorts of discussions that I'm very keen I'm wanting to support ArcMed in terms of having this crack at defining our appetite. I mean, let's face it, we're going to be playing with it at our next risk committee and the one after it and the one after it, but I think that's actually where we try and truck onto. Blowing your agenda all over the place. Do we have a way forward out of this exercise, by the way? We've had lots of good discussion. Perhaps let's just round back. Do we have a good sense of what could happen from here next with this as a result of this discussion? Mark? Yeah. Well, tolerance and appetite can be interchangeable, but there are purists that say they are quite different as well. So. Yeah. Mark?
I think we've got some great guidance around how we tighten things up and represent them possibly in a slightly different way, but that still achieves the intent of the work that the risk and assurance team here is striving for. And as I said earlier, this is an iterative process, you know, given that we are at a very immature level of risk delivery. So there will need to be changes and moderations over the course of the next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. So live with those.
And look, sorry, because I want to ask Janice one question. You quite right. I mean, we've talked about our big risks, strategic and governance risks. Okay, that's been really useful, and we've talked about appetite. But you quite rightly have said there's also a joint about likelihood and consequence tables themselves. Did you have any views on what is on these 2 pages about likelihood and consequence? Because you said it was important to define them well.
I haven't looked at them specifically, and I understood that there was to be a review done with SLT around that before it came back. I was just making the point that defining the consequences for the organisation itself, whether they're minor or they're moderate or whatever, is important, and that's probably really crucial for us managing the risks, even without agreement on risk appetite, etc. Just having that really clearly defined and understood by everyone makes a big difference.
Well, I think even if we go back onto the appetite decision, the fact that we've suggested some Timaruising and probably within that Mark and ArcMed some thinking about actually have we got all the sort of rounded descriptors we could have in each of those columns? Wouldn't be a problem. If we leave the appetite discussion, that perhaps we've got the sense that if the moderate column described probably where we want to land, that's going to be a good thing, because it's going to drive a wee bit of direction.
Yeah, when you're determining the actual rating for the consequence, it's important that there's a moderation that regarding the appetite in whoever's making that decision's mind, because if you've got someone really conservative, it's going to be quite different if you've got someone.
Yeah.
So there needs to be some moderation there.
Yeah, so there's an iterative process, and is that we're only giving ourselves more homework to come back to this and readdress it, although we've established probably some of the principles, which I think hopefully is helpful from that perspective. You okay with this, Nigel, so far? Good. I'm assuming Archimedes is, because he but yell out Archimedes.
Archimedes probably sitting there going, "Oh my God, what have I got myself into?"
Well, if that's the case, it's my problem, because Archimedes did take me through what he was doing, and I said it's going to be great, and I think it's actually, so far, we've had a good discussion. Archimedes, I've lost your agenda. Where are you up to in your agenda, and what do we need to do next?
Just to get the feedback for aligning and making sure that everything is up to standards. So if you have, so we have only one thing to cover, which is a case study and an example of a situation, and apply what we have said so far, if what might be the risk of these situations, and is it within our risk appetite or not?
Brilliant. I read through this. This is one that you've used somewhere else, I think, as well, isn't it, Archimedes? I reckon it's worth a try, because we're trying to make it live. I know we've had some sort of sense of live when we've talked about consequences, but we should all have a crack at this. Okay, so that's what we're up to. So have a go.